Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We have talked extensively about this USC program over the last couple of days and weeks, but a lot of our conversations have been surrounding the recruiting trail. And it's the middle of June, official visit season. That's certainly not going to change. But I was kind of itching to talk some USC football and what we're going to see from this program in 2024. And you kind of take a look on Twitter, you take a look at the national media landscape, a lot of talking heads kind of counting this USC team out going into the Big Ten. And yes, there are certainly some question marks on this USC team that we are waiting to see some answers for. I think that a lot of these answers could be on this USC roster. I want to get into my 5 most important players to break out for this USC program in 2024. Now, this is not necessarily the 5 best players on this USC roster, but more importantly, if USC is going to have success in 2024, reach their potential, what 5 players need to break out in the 2024 year? Fired up to get into this one. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the USC fans. It's been a blast talking this program on the recruiting trail, and the amount of support y'all continue to show, all the fight-ons in the comment section. That stuff means the world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, for the USC fans, you guys always give me phenomenal feedback in the comment section. I only have 5 players. I think we're leaving out a lot of really good players that certainly could break out and are very important for USC to break out in 2024. Would love to get some more names in the comment section. We'll chop it up down there. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with, I think, what's by far the biggest question mark for this USC program in 2024 heading into the Big Ten, and that is the defensive line play. And I think particularly on the inside of the defensive line. Now, we talk a lot about Bear Alexander, a guy that I just don't think anybody's talking about, that's just kind of sitting there and just has been a really damn good football player throughout his duration of his college football career. And that's Vanderbilt defensive lineman Nate Clifton. And you look at Nate Clifton, and kind of what intrigues me the most and why I think he's so important to this USC program is this has been a guy that's played, he's going into a 6th year of college football. He's a 3-year starter in the SEC, but I think most importantly, he's extremely versatile on the defensive line. This is a guy that certainly can play that edge rusher spot, but at 6'4", 290 pounds, you take a look back at the film from Vanderbilt in 2023, played a lot of his snaps on the inside of the defensive line. And then a lot of USC fans are having this conversation of not only what is the talent level going to look like, but I think more importantly, what's the depth going to be on the inside of the defensive line? I look at a guy, Nate Clifton, who again has played over 1,500 snaps during his collegiate career, and say you could have a very solid answer to some of those question marks we have on the inside of the defensive line with a guy like Nate Clifton. And I think that's really important because you look at the edge rusher position for USC. I don't think many USC fans have many question marks about that position, right? Whether it's Jamil Muhammad, Braylon Shelby, Anthony Lucas, true freshman Cam Fountain, I think the edge rusher spot is in a pretty good spot. I think our big question mark is the depth and talent on the inside of the defensive line. You're looking at a guy, Nate Clifton, who certainly could provide a lot of juice and depth to the inside of the defensive line as well. If he has a big year and kind of continues what he did at Vanderbilt in the SEC, that's a massive storyline for this USC program. Next player I'm going to go to, and the USC fans, if y'all been listening for the last couple of weeks and months, you guys knew this kid was going to be on the list, and that is linebacker Eric Gentry. He's a defensive unicorn, and I think the biggest problem with Eric Gentry is I don't think Alex Grinch and the defensive staff last year really knew how to use a guy like Eric Gentry. There are so many different ways that you can get him involved in a football game. Yes, he can play that traditional off-ball linebacker, but he's a guy that when you drop back in coverage, specifically in zone coverage, 6'6", he's up to 215 pounds, worth noting that. I mean, he's extremely long, can get his hands on a lot of footballs, get into a lot of different throwing windows. So he gives you some value dropping back in coverage. But then you take a look at some of the pass rush numbers. Talking about someone that's 6'6", has a ton of length, a ton of juice off the line of scrimmage. You go back to his numbers as a pass rusher for USC, only rushed the passer 22 times, but had 4 quarterback hurries, a 15.8% pass rush win rate. One of the things that I think makes D'Anton Lynn such a phenomenal defensive coordinator, going back to what you saw from him at UCLA, is he knew how to use his personnel. And I think the biggest problem with Eric Gentry was not necessarily can he play football at the Power 5 level. I think the conversation was how do we utilize just a defensive chess piece, a unicorn like Eric Gentry. Alex Grinch couldn't figure that out. If Dan Lynn does figure it out, you're looking at an impact, a difference maker on USC's defense that I don't necessarily know how he's going to get used. I think that's why you paid D'Anton Lynn the big bucks, and I'm just talking into a microphone. But I'm very intrigued by Eric Gentry, and I really do hope that we see him in some different kind of ways for this USC defense heading into the 2024 season. Next player I want to talk about, and that's going to be the starting left tackle, Elijah Page. And again, the USC fans who have been rocking with the fellas for the last couple of weeks and months, I think this kid is a future first-round NFL draft pick. You just don't see 6'7", 310-pound bodies move as functionally as Elijah Page, especially as a true freshman. I watched back that Louisville game in the bowl game this morning, and I was just so impressed with not only Elijah Page dealing with the athleticism of some damn good Louisville edge rushers in that bowl game, but I mean, also the physical dominance that he portrayed as a true freshman in 2023. I think this kid has a very bright future. And if you're talking about a guy like Elijah Page heading into the Big Ten where we are stressing line of scrimmage play, you might have an all-conference left tackle in Elijah Page, and that is massive for USC heading into 2024. Fired up for Elijah Page. Next player we got to talk about, and we have to talk about Miller Moss. I mean, in terms of breakout players, importance, Miller Moss has to be at the top of the list. And I think what kind of intrigues me about Miller Moss and what I think a lot of people are getting wrong is, all right, I'm not going to argue that Caleb Williams might be the better quarterback than Miller Moss. But I think a lot of people's doubts around this USC program is that USC is going to take a massive step back at the quarterback position. I think a lot of USC fans are sitting there and say, hey, we just saw Miller Moss light up a Louisville defense that was one of the better units in the ACC. This is a guy that's been in Lincoln Riley's system going into year 3. I have a lot of confidence in Miller Moss, and a lot of people kind of treat him as just not a star caliber quarterback. He, coming out of high school, was a top 100 national prospect, one of the most coveted quarterbacks in the 2021 cycle. This kid has a lot of game to him. And then you go back to see what you saw from him during that Louisville game and the bowl game and say, one, I mean, he played within the Lincoln Riley offense. And I think that's probably what excites the USC fans the most is you look at all the wide receivers that USC has. You look at Lincoln Riley calling the plays. If you just do what Lincoln Riley asks of you to do, you're going to be a damn good quarterback in this USC offense. And I think that's what Miller Moss's specialty is. And this is a guy that's cerebral. He's getting the ball out quick, on time to where it needs to go in this offense. Let your playmakers do the rest, right? Zachariah Branch, Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson. Let those guys go cook. They're going to help you, but you just have to be the point guard of this offense. I think Miller Moss is very much capable of doing that. And then you take a look at some of the more in-depth numbers about Miller Moss and kind of what really stood out to me. Under pressure, Miller Moss was 5 of 7 for 149 yards and 3 touchdowns in that Louisville game. What was the biggest knock we had about Caleb Williams last year is he did not operate very well under pressure. Miller Moss was standing in the pocket, taking hits, getting the football out on time accurately. What he did under pressure was extremely impressive. Then you look at attempts 20-plus yards down the field. He was 5 of 8. And this is a guy that can attack the deeper third. He can deal with pressure in his face. He's checking off, I mean, a lot of boxes that if you're a USC fan, you want to see checked off by your starting quarterback. Last player I want to talk about in terms of breakout players, and that's going to be transfer Woody Marks coming over from Mississippi State. Now, why I decided to highlight Woody Marks is I think he can be a chess piece in this USC offense. Yeah, Woody Marks has ran for over 2,000 yards during his, or over 1,800 yards, excuse me, during his career at Mississippi State in the SEC. What I'm most intrigued about with Woody Marks is what he can do as a pass catcher out of the backfield. This is a guy with over 214 receptions, over 1,200 receiving yards. You look at one of the matchups that I think USC really could attack in the Big Ten is getting a guy like Woody Marks on some of these Big Ten linebackers, and you look at some of the Big Ten linebackers as a Big Ten fan myself, a lot of these linebackers are really good operating in a phone booth between the tackles, filling run fits. What they might struggle with is getting out to the sideline, being able to operate in space. A guy like Woody Marks is a running back that you can use to attack some of those linebackers that might be damn good linebackers between the tackle box, but we have question marks about what they can do in space. You have a guy like Woody Marks, who's a phenomenal pass catcher. Can you get him in space on some of these linebackers and let him go make plays for this USC offense? I think from a pure rushing concept, I think you're going to see a lot of Quentin Joyner, the sophomore, going into year 2, along with Woody Marks. But I really like what Woody Marks can do in space as a pass catcher. And I think that's something that USC really could use to their advantage going into the Big Ten. And I think that's kind of an interesting conversation to dig into, where you want to always ask the questions of how USC is going to deal with the Big Ten physicality. Yeah, sure, that's a question. What about the question of how the Big Ten defenses are going to deal with USC speed on the perimeter? Because that's certainly a question for a lot of Big Ten programs as well. Woody Marks, a guy that I think could really highlight some of those advantages that USC has. Those are my 5 players. You'll notice I left out all the wide receivers. You certainly want to see them break out. I'm fully confident that you'll see some of them break out, but I think it came down to I'm not that nervous about them breaking out. I have a lot of confidence that some of those USC wide receivers are going to emerge as some of the better wide receivers in the conference. These are some of the guys that when you look at USC and you look at the end of the year, end of November, and kind of evaluate USC season, if USC had a successful season, I think these 5 players we're going to have good years for USC. We'll close it out on that. Again, would love to hear some names that you guys have in the comment section. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.